In 1971, a group of ordinary college students volunteered for a psychological experiment. They would spend 2 weeks inside a fake prison. Some became guards, others became prisoners. But within days, the experiment became so disturbing, it had to be shut down. Dark ambience fades in, metal door sound, silence. Then begin. For centuries, people have asked the same disturbing question. Are human beings naturally good? Or does power slowly transform ordinary people into something darker? In 1971, a psychologist at Stanford University wanted to explore that question through an experiment. At first, the idea sounded harmless. Volunteers would pretend to be prisoners, and guards inside a simulated prison environment. The experiment would last 2 weeks. Participants would be paid for their time. Everything would remain controlled and safe. At least, that was the plan. Young college students responded to newspaper advertisements offering money in exchange for participating in a psychological study. They were ordinary people, students with futures, dreams, families. None of them were criminals. None were considered dangerous. They were psychologically evaluated beforehand and considered mentally stable. Then researchers divided them into 2 groups, guards and prisoners. What happened next would shock the world. Researchers transformed part of Stanford University's basement into a fake prison. The windows were removed. Doors became prison cells. Narrow hallways created feelings of isolation. Surveillance cameras monitored everything. Even though the prison was artificial, researchers wanted participants to feel like the experience was real. The guards were given uniforms, sunglasses, batons, authority. The prisoners lost their names. Instead, they received identification numbers, a small detail, but psychologically powerful, because names feel human, numbers feel controlled. Then the experiment officially began, and almost immediately, something strange started happening. The guards slowly stopped acting and began becoming their roles in staying. At first, interactions seemed normal, awkward, uncomfortable perhaps, but still controlled. Then the atmosphere inside the prison began changing. Some guards became increasingly aggressive. They created strict rules, punishments, humiliating routines. Prisoners were ordered to repeat identification numbers for long periods of time. Some were forced to perform exhausting exercises. Others were publicly embarrassed. And perhaps the most disturbing part, the cruelty appeared to grow naturally. Nobody instructed the guards to behave this way. Researchers had not ordered physical violence, yet power itself seemed to be transforming behavior. The guards began enjoying control. Meanwhile, the prisoners slowly began emotionally collapsing. Some stopped resisting entirely. Others became withdrawn and silent. A few suffered severe emotional breakdowns, crying, panic, anxiety, fear. The line between acting and reality was disappearing. Even after the disaster of 1996, people continued climbing Everest. Year after year, generation after generation. Why? Perhaps because there is something deeply human about wanting to stand where few others have stood, to challenge fear, to chase meaning, to feel larger than ordinary life. But Everest has always reminded humanity of one terrifying truth. Nature cannot be conquered completely. High above the clouds, where the air becomes too thin to breathe, the mountain still waits, silent, frozen, unforgiving. As days passed, the prison environment became psychologically intense. Participants no longer behaved like students pretending to play roles. The guards treated prisoners like actual inmates. The prisoners began behaving like powerless individuals trapped inside a real prison system. Sleep deprivation increased emotional instability. Constant surveillance created paranoia. Isolation damaged morale. Some prisoners reportedly begged to leave the experiment early. Others became emotionally numb. One prisoner suffered such an intense emotional breakdown that researchers removed him from the experiment. But even then, many people involved failed to fully recognize how dangerous the situation had become, because something terrifying was happening psychologically. The environment itself was changing people. Ordinary students were becoming cruel, passive, obedient, dominant, broken, and all of it happened inside a fake prison. Perhaps the most frightening part of the Stanford prison experiment was not the guards or the prisoners, but how quickly human beings adapted to power and submission. The experiment revealed something deeply uncomfortable. Under certain conditions, ordinary people may behave in ways they never imagined possible. The guards were not professional officers, yet some became increasingly authoritarian. The prisoners knew they could technically leave, yet psychologically, many behaved as though escape was impossible. Reality itself seemed to blur, and that raised terrifying questions. How much of human behavior is shaped by environment? How easily can authority corrupt people? Could similar psychological changes happen outside experiments? Inside prisons? Armies? Governments? History already suggested the answer might be yes. The experiment was originally supposed to continue for 2 weeks. It lasted only 6 days. Researchers finally realized the situation had become dangerously unethical. Emotional damage was becoming severe. Participants were suffering psychologically. The prison environment had grown toxic. And so, the experiment was shut down early. News of the study later spread across the world. Many people were shocked by what had happened. Others were disturbed by what the experiment seemed to reveal about human nature, because the Stanford prison experiment suggested something deeply unsettling. Evil does not always arrive wearing a monstrous face. Sometimes, it appears gradually, quietly, through power, through control, through ordinary people placed inside the wrong environment. More than 50 years later, the Stanford prison experiment remains one of the most controversial psychological studies ever conducted. Some critics questioned its methods. Others debated whether participants were influenced intentionally. But regardless of the controversy, one uncomfortable question still remains. If ordinary people could change this quickly inside a fake prison, what happens inside real systems of power? Perhaps the experiment never truly frightened people because of the prison itself. Perhaps what terrified the world most was realizing how thin the line can be between ordinary behavior and darkness.